So this being my first Palm Sunday down here in Florida, it is interesting, and I think it's only natural and normal that you start to do some comparing and contrasting between being down here and where I was at this time last year up north in Wisconsin. There's some differences that I've kind of come to note, and one of which is that when you come into worship on a day like this, and you're handed a palm frond, which are about as ordinary and everyday part of the scenery down here, well, when you see these things every single day, I think it awakens about as much enthusiasm and excitement as being given an invitation to go and watch paint dry, right? I mean, these are so common, and they're around us every single day. They just kind of blend into the scenery. We've got 3 or 4 of them at our house, palm plants. But we need to remember. We need to remember that there is a place where in the bleak midwinter, it isn't just a song you sing at Christmas time, it's your life for 6 long months. There is a place where when it gets to 50 degrees, you don't complain and reach for a sweater. You roll down your car window and you start using words like balmy. There is a place where there is snow still piled up and it's become gray and a congregating place for trash. There's a place, friends, where people actually have to order these. You don't just go and click them down from your backyard. And in that place, when Palm Sunday rolls around, people kind of, their shoulders slouch down and their feet shuffle, and they come into worship, and they're handed a palm frond. And you see this glint and this glimmer in their eyes, and they'll cling. They'll cling. God's frozen chosen up north cling to these palm branches as though somehow the warmth of Florida will do photosynthesis to their souls today. But I've kind of come used to having these palm fronds all around me. But as I was thinking about it this week, this symbol that we all have in our hands today, I started asking myself, why a palm branch? Why, when Jesus rode into Jerusalem that day, did the crowd decide to pick up some palm branches, take them down, and wave them high above their heads? I mean, was it just a matter of convenience? Was it just the thing that they had closest to them, and so they grabbed them up, sort of like you might take tree leaves to make palms out of and wave them high above your heads? But the more I thought about that, the more I thought, well, it doesn't really make any sense. Would any of us, if we were sitting at a parade today, would we think it's a really good idea to wave a leaf above our heads? Probably not. We wouldn't do that. So why? Why did the people in Jesus' day choose to take a palm frond? What else was going on? If it wasn't just a coincidence, and maybe it wasn't just about a convenience factor, maybe there was something deeper going on there. If you look back at the Old Testament and stories in the Old Testament, what you'll see there is that the palm frond kind of plays an important role. David, in the time when he was crowned king, not only did he ride in on a donkey himself in his festive parade, the people at those times also waved palm branches above their head. They welcomed David as their king into their midst with palm branches high above their heads. Solomon, King David's son, when he would go to the temple that he built, when there was a festive parade of any sort, palm branches became the symbol of triumph and victory. To have a palm branch in your hand during a parade, well, that was just sort of normal and natural for the people in Jesus' day. It was a symbol of victory and triumph. It was a symbol of pride for the people. Much the same way when we today go to a 4th of July parade, oftentimes they'll pass out flags, right? And we'll wave those flags high above our heads as a symbol of our own freedom. For the people in Jesus' day, to take these palm branches into hand. They would cling to them as a reminder of the hope, as a reminder of God's presence, as a reminder of God's promise of new life all around them. This palm branch, it was more than a coincidence. It was more than just something convenient. It was more than just something they did on the spur of a moment. This palm branch meant everything to the people of God in Jesus' day. I want you to hold on to that. Hold on to the palm branch being a symbol of triumph and victory and hope. And I want you to also remember the backdrop of the Palm Sunday narrative, and really the backdrop of our entire Holy Week that we're about to enter into again. The backdrop was the people of God, the Israelites, and Jesus celebrating and preparing to celebrate Passover, which our Jewish brothers and sisters here in this community will do on Tuesday this week. The Passover celebration is one of retelling and remembering and re-entering into how God provided a way when there was no way. It's all recorded in the book of Exodus, right? There, the people of God had become oppressed. They'd become indentured servants to the Pharaoh. And Pharaoh had this pyramid scheme of wanting bricks. Bricks. Lots and lots of bricks. Pharaoh had this insatiable desire and thirst for bricks. He just couldn't get enough. And so he kept on asking the Israelites to build more and more and more. And the people of God felt oppressed by their labor. And they cried out to God, "Help us!" And in the beginning pages of Exodus, we're told that God heard that cry. But the word that God heard isn't just a physical hearing. It isn't just an intellectual hearing. Exodus implies that when God heard the cry of God's people down there, God's own heart broke open. God knew that God had to do something. And so God appeared to Moses and sent him down to Egypt to confront Pharaoh, to tell Pharaoh to let God's people go. And Pharaoh initially had a heart of stone, but eventually that heart would be broken open with the 10th plague, right? And the people were eventually allowed to go, but then Pharaoh reconsidered, sent Pharaoh's army to chase them down, right? And they find themselves, the people of God find themselves on the bank of the Red Sea. The sea in front of them, Pharaoh's guards behind them pressing in, and it looks like there's nothing that's going to happen until all of a sudden Moses parts the sea. God makes a way when there was no way for the people of God to cross over. That's the story that Jesus on Palm Sunday was preparing. They were on the cusp of retelling that story. And the truth is, you don't retell that story about how your ancestors were oppressed when you have a Roman guard breathing down your neck without making some kind of connections. You don't tell a story about how God led you to the promised land where there was milk and honey flowing. You don't tell that story when you're also paying a tax to Caesar who thinks he's God without making some kind of connection between then and that day. And so make no mistake about it. When Jesus, like David, rode in on a donkey, and those people held of that palm branch and shouted out, "Hosanna!" Let's try that again. The people grasped the palm branch and shouted out, "Hosanna!" without making some connection, some hope that Jesus might usher in freedom, release from the captivity of the Roman oppression that was right then and there. And friends, make no mistake about it. The Roman guards who were very present all around watching that Palm Sunday parade, they might not have known what that palm represented. They might not know the story of David and Solomon and all the celebrations that took place around palms. They knew that that crowd was starting to get a little bit out of hand. And they knew that trouble might be brewing. And Jesus, for his part, in the telling of John's gospel, it's this wonderful complexity. Right? The other three Gospels all have the disciples getting the donkey and bringing it to Jesus. But John has Jesus completely in control. Jesus is the one to get the colt. Jesus is the one who puts himself up on the donkey. And you know, there's kind of a way of reading John's Gospel that you're not quite sure initially. Is Jesus going to participate in the parade? Or is he, like the Lone Ranger, going to ride away in the opposite direction and go his own way? But he rides through that Palm Sunday procession, and it sets in motion what we call our holiest week as people of faith. It sets in motion this week that we're on the cusp of retelling and remembering and re-entering into. On Thursday, we'll gather around the table with our closest friends, just as Jesus gathered with his closest friends. And we'll remember how Jesus took a loaf of bread and broke it open and told his friends that that bread was like his body. He had broken open his entire life, his whole relationship with God. He sought to share with his friends, with the people. And then he'll tell them the brokenness is never the last word. And he'll pour out a cup, so overflowing with God's grace that that cup spills onto the table with the hope of God's presence in our midst. They'll push back from that table to go and pray together. But even as they're praying, one of Jesus' closest friends will betray him, will turn him over to those Roman authorities. One will deny that he even knows him. One and all the others will scatter and desert Jesus. Jesus will then, on Maundy, Thursday evening, participate in a different kind of parade. He'll be led from the high priest to Pilate, back to the high priest, back to Pilate, back and forth, until finally they're just tired and they want to break the cycle and they render the verdict of crucifixion. And we'll gather around the cross and we'll notice our own brokenness and God's unconditional and unceasing love for us in that moment. And we'll sit in the silence of Saturday as the disciples did, not quite sure what to make of all of this. And then we'll gather once again on Easter's story, the other part of the narrative that we're entering into, the unexpected mystery of an empty tomb and God's emphatic yes. That's the week. That's the week we're about to enter into. It's a week that's as familiar as the back of our hand, but every week we retell this story. We kind of buckle in for the emotional roller coaster that we're about to enter into. But as we tell this narrative this week, friends, we don't just do it looking at the past, right? We don't just look back as that's an event that happened then and there. Part of the power of Holy Week and why we call it holy is that what we're about to tell is our story. A story that is still happening in our midst, right here, right now, for each and every single one of us, and for us as a church. And so I ask you this morning, where's that joy? Where is joy bubbling up within you? Where do you want to raise a palm branch high and shout out, Hosanna? Right? Where is that happening for you? I'll tell you where it's happening for me. All of our boxes in our house are finally unpacked. Hosanna! Thanks be to God, right? And we have company coming at 5 o'clock this afternoon. So where is that Hosanna? Where is that